The air in the small, cramped room always smelled faintly of damp earth and yesterday's dinner, a constant reminder of life lived close to the bone. She knew every creak of the worn floorboards, every patch in the threadbare rug. Survival here was a quiet art, a daily negotiation with scarcity. But whispers had turned to promises, a chance dangled just out of reach, a world away, shimmering with impossible light. What happens when the forgotten step into the gilded halls of the privileged? Can courage bloom where only shadows have fallen? Or will the stark glare of wealth expose vulnerabilities best left hidden? True strength isn't measured by inheritance, but by the fire forged in hardship. If you believe in the fight for fairness, hit like and subscribe to journey with us through more tales of resilience and rising against the odds. Emily stepped through the towering iron gates, the heavy clang echoing behind her like a door slamming shut on everything she knew. The air here was different, crisp, scented faintly with expensive lawn clippings and something undeniably luxurious, a smell she couldn't name, but felt deep in her lungs like pure, filtered money. Her worn sneakers crunched on gravel that felt too neat, too precise. Towering stone buildings, draped in ivy that looked painstakingly curated, rose before her, their windows gleaming like cold eyes. Inside, the hush was broken only by the distant, melodious laughter of girls who seemed to float, draped in fabrics that shimmered and rustled with impossible grace. Their shoes didn't scuff, they clicked softly on polished marble floors that reflected the ornate chandeliers hanging from impossibly high ceilings. The scent inside was overwhelming, a mix of perfumes she'd only seen advertised in magazines she couldn't afford, mingling with the sterile scent of polish and old money. She clutched the strap of her faded backpack, its familiar weight a stark contrast to the sleek, logo-emblazoned bags casually discarded on plush sofas. A group of girls paused, their perfectly made-up eyes raking over her simple dress, the slight tremor in her hands. A cold wave washed over her, a visceral sense of being utterly, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just a school. It was a fortress of exclusivity, and she was an intruder, a shadow in a world of blinding light. The grand stone archway loomed, an imposing gateway to a world built on privilege. A faint, distinct scent of polished wood and expensive cleaning products hung in the cool morning air as she stepped onto the meticulously manicured grounds. The sounds of laughter and animated chatter drifted from clusters of students gathered near the entrance, their crisp uniforms and easy postures speaking volumes. Immediately, the chatter seemed to dip, eyes flicking towards her, then quickly away. It wasn't overtly hostile, not yet, but it was a subtle, collective recoil. A shiver, unrelated to the temperature, traced its way down her spine. This was it, the place she was meant to belong, but where every instinct screamed she was an intruder. Inside, the polished floors gleamed underfoot, reflecting the high ceilings and ornate fixtures. The air felt thick with unspoken judgment. As she approached the front desk, a woman with severe glasses peered over them, her expression shifting from neutral to one of mild distaste as she scanned her. There was no warm welcome, no helpful guidance offered freely. Just a brisk, almost impatient tone. The woman's voice was sharp, like breaking glass.
"And you are?"
She stated her name, feeling a flush creep up her neck under the woman's unnerving gaze. The woman tapped fingernails on the counter, a small, irritating sound in the vast foyer.
"Ah, the scholarship student? Registration is elsewhere, down that corridor. Try not to get lost.
It wasn't the words themselves, but the cold dismissal in her eyes. The way she turned back to her papers before the sentence was even finished. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors felt like walking a gauntlet. Pairs of students, laughing and deep in conversation, would abruptly fall silent as she passed, their eyes following her until she was out of sight. A few bolder ones didn't bother to hide their reactions. She overheard a snippet of conversation as she rounded a corner, two girls whispering behind cupped hands, their voices dripping with disdain.
Can you believe they're just letting anyone in now?
The words stung like 1,000 tiny cuts. The weight of their stares, the quiet judgment, the palpable sense of being other settled heavily on her shoulders. The air here didn't feel like opportunity. It felt like a suffocating blanket of scrutiny. Every glance, every averted eye, every whispered word reinforced the chasm that separated her from this world. The conflict wasn't a physical confrontation, but a chilling, psychological onslaught, a silent declaration that she did not belong. The first impressions were etched not in stone, but in the cold, unwelcoming eyes of those who already called this place home. Ilara walked the polished halls, the soles of her worn shoes whispering against the gleaming tile. Her dress, a simple cotton print she had carefully mended, felt heavy, not from its physical weight, but from the eyes that seemed to bore into its humble weave, cataloging its every perceived flaw. It was a stark contrast to the silks and crisp linens that glided past her in shimmering waves of confidence. Her backpack, sturdy but faded from too much use and too little newness, seemed to announce her difference before she even spoke, its simple canvas a stark visual declaration of her world against theirs. The whispers began softly at first, like distant rustling leaves, then grew bold enough to reach her ears, carried on gusts of careless laughter. They didn't just notice the difference, they pointed it out, loudly, for others to hear.
Honestly, look at that stitching. Did she sew it herself with string?
The sound of their snickers prickled her skin like coarse wool.
That fabric looks like sackcloth. Probably smells like mildew.
He feigned a sniff, and his friends erupted in louder laughter. Each comment was a tiny, stinging cut, focusing relentlessly on the texture, the color, the simple, unadorned nature of her clothes and her few belongings. Her plain shoes, her lack of accessories, the way the light didn't catch anything she wore. These became daily targets, miniature battlegrounds of judgment. The air around her seemed to thicken with their scorn, making it hard to breathe. Her shoulders instinctively hunched forward, trying to shrink from their gaze, from the burning heat that rose in her cheeks.
Please, just leave me alone.
Her voice was a quiet plea, barely a whisper, but it only seemed to fuel their cruelty. The mockery sharpened, the words delivered with increasing venom.
Alone? But we're just admiring your unique style. So rustic.
Another wave of laughter washed over her. The weight of their judgment pressed down, making her simple clothes feel like lead. The cotton dress wasn't just a piece of fabric anymore. It was a symbol they had seized upon, twisted, and turned into a weapon to remind her daily of her place outside their gilded circle. The burden wasn't in the cloth itself, but in the constant, crushing pressure of their superficiality, layered stitch by stitch onto her weary spirit. It was a painful, undeniable truth. In this world, they measured worth by thread count, and hers, in their eyes, was impossibly low, making everything she wore feel impossibly heavy. The air in the hallway once thick with unspoken judgment, now buzzed with a cruel, audible current. No longer were the barbs delivered through furtive glances and hushed tones just out of earshot. The whispers had found their voice, and they were growing loud enough to sting. It started subtly, a snicker barely muffled behind a hand, a sarcastic comment delivered a little too loudly just as she passed. But the shift was undeniable. A palpable increase in hostility that made her stomach clench. The ringleaders became impossible to ignore. Sarah, with her perfectly coiffed hair and eyes like chips of ice, seemed to orchestrate the campaign. Beside her often stood Mark, whose easy laugh could turn instantly venomous. What had been a general atmosphere of disapproval was now directed squarely at her, a spotlight of malice that burned hotter each day. One afternoon, near the lockers, the pretense of subtlety vanished entirely. As she reached for her books, Sarah and her clique materialized nearby. Their voices, usually modulated for public performance, were sharp and clear.
Look, it's her again. Still pretending she belongs?
Another girl in the group giggled, a sound like breaking glass. She felt a hot flush creep up her neck, the familiar knot tightening in her chest. She tried to focus on the simple task of retrieving her things, hoping they would pass, hoping the floor would swallow her whole. But the taunts didn't cease. Mark, leaning against the locker a few feet away, added his weight to the assault.
Yeah. Saw her trying to talk in class. Didn't anyone tell you? Some people just aren't cut out for, well, anything important.
The words hit harder than any physical blow. They weren't just cruel. They were designed to chip away at her very sense of worth. The feeling of their eyes on her, the cold air surrounding their huddle, the harsh sound of their laughter echoing in the corridor. It was overwhelming. This open antagonism quickly translated into active exclusion. In the cafeteria, tables would suddenly become full as she approached. Study groups dissolved or reformed in different locations without a word to her. When she tried to join a conversation, a chilling silence would fall, followed by a swift change of topic or an abrupt turning away. The isolation was no longer accidental. It was a carefully constructed wall, built by their sneers and deliberate avoidance. She felt the rough texture of the cold locker against her back as she leaned into it, trying to disappear. The scent of cleaning solution and stale air seemed to amplify the feeling of being trapped. Each deliberate snub, each cutting remark, was a brick added to the prison they were building around her, making the world outside her own small bubble feel increasingly hostile and vast. The constant pressure, the feeling of being under siege, was beginning to wear her down in ways the quiet stairs never could. The conflict had moved from the shadows into the harsh glare of the open, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The chill in the air wasn't just from the open office window. It seeped into her bones from the huddle of colleagues near the coffee machine. Laughter bubbled, warm and inclusive, a stark contrast to the void that seemed to form around her every time she approached. They were planning the impromptu Friday evening gathering, voices hushed just enough to be exclusive, yet loud enough for the snippets of shared excitement to twist the knife. She saw the sideways glances, felt the subtle shift in their posture, a closing of ranks that was palpable, like a physical barrier. It wasn't just this one time. It was the casual dismissal when project teams were formed, the sudden halt in conversations when she entered a room, the lunches where everyone else mysteriously had plans. They were masters of deliberate omission, expert architects of social ostracization. She felt like a ghost haunting the hallways, invisible to those she desperately wanted to connect with, yet acutely aware of their eyes on her back, constantly judging, dissecting her every awkward movement or hesitant word. The ache in her chest was a constant companion, a heavy, leaden weight fueled by the gnawing loneliness. She longed for the simple warmth of belonging, the effortless camaraderie she witnessed daily. Instead, she was adrift in a sea of faces that offered only indifference or thinly veiled contempt. It was agonizing to be surrounded by people, yet feel utterly alone, the most isolated person in the crowded space. The scent of their shared victory over a difficult task, the sight of their easy smiles, it all served as a bitter reminder of the world from which she was barred. One afternoon, a group gathered by the whiteboard, sketching out ideas for a new initiative. She hesitated, then walked over, offering a tentative suggestion. A cold silence fell, broken only by the tap of a marker.
Oh, we've already moved past that stage. This is more an internal discussion.
The words hung in the air, icy and dismissive. Another colleague, a male whose sneer was a familiar sight, added a cutting remark.
Yeah, you wouldn't really get the nuances, Sarah. It's a bit advanced.
He chuckled, a sound devoid of humor, joined by others. The blood drained from her face, heat rushing to her ears. She nodded meekly, mumbled an apology she didn't mean, and retreated, the silence pressing in on her back like a physical force. The whiteboard, filled with their collaborative thoughts, felt like a monument to her exclusion. Each instance, each deliberate slight, chipped away at her spirit, reinforcing the cruel narrative they were weaving around her. The feeling of being constantly under scrutiny, yet unseen and unheard, was a peculiar form of torture. But with the pain came a slow, simmering realization. Their power lay in her reaction, in the depth of the wound they inflicted. And perhaps, just perhaps, the invisibility they forced upon her could also be a shield, a place from which to observe, to understand, and to find a strength they couldn't see. The moral lesson, harsh and undeniable, was that true belonging could never be granted by those who profited from exclusion. It had to be found within, a fragile seed waiting for the right soil to grow. The fluorescent lights of the meeting room felt harsh, casting long, unflattering shadows across the faces gathered there. Anya shifted in her uncomfortable chair, the fabric scratching faintly against her skin. A knot tightened in her stomach. She always felt exposed in these obligatory gatherings, the air thick with unspoken rivalries and barely concealed disdain. The low hum of the projector was a constant, irritating drone beneath the forced cordiality. He stood at the front, charismatic and cruel, his eyes scanning the room with an almost predatory glint. Mark, the architect of her daily anxieties, seemed to savor the discomfort he radiated. Anya tried to shrink into herself, focusing on the generic company logo on the screen, but she could feel his gaze linger on her, a cold touch against her skin. Then his voice, smooth and confident, cut through the quiet anticipation, steering the conversation away from project updates towards something far more personal. A chill snaked down Anya's spine. She smelled the stale coffee and nervous sweat in the room, suddenly overwhelming. He delivered the line with practiced ease, twisting a private vulnerability she had once foolishly shared into a grotesque punchline for the assembled crowd. Laughter erupted instantly, loud and sharp, echoing off the sterile walls. It wasn't just polite tittering. It was a roaring, mocking sound that felt like physical blows. Sarah's voice sliced through the noise, adding another layer of venom. A perfectly timed, sugary sweet comment that landed with the force of a brick.
Oh, bless her heart, trying her best with, well, you know.
Anya's cheeks burned, a fiery blush spreading like wildfire. The sound of their mirth was deafening, a tidal wave of public scorn washing over her. She could taste the metallic tang of fear and shame on her tongue. The laughter subsided, replaced by a heavy, pregnant silence, broken only by the clicking of keyboards and the clearing of throats. Every eye in the room felt like a spotlight, dissecting her, judging her. She saw pity in some faces, amusement in others, but mostly a profound indifference that cut deeper than the laughter. Her hands trembled in her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped them together. A profound ache settled in her chest, heavy and suffocating. The world outside the meeting room seemed to fade away. Only the burning humiliation remained, a scar etched onto her soul in front of witnesses. This wasn't just hurt. It was a violation, a public flaying of her most vulnerable parts. As the icy grip of despair threatened to consume her, something else stirred beneath the pain. A cold, hard ember of defiance. They thought this would break her, extinguish her entirely. But in the ashes of his public shaming, a flicker of grim determination began to glow. The sting of the laughter echoed long after she had fled, each sound a physical blow that settled deep in her chest. Tears flowed hot and heavy, blurring the edges of the deserted hallway she now found herself in. The air felt thick with the residue of public shame, clinging to her like an unwanted garment. She hugged her arms tight around herself, trying to ward off the cold dread that had replaced the initial shock. Her throat ached, raw from stifled sobs, and the salty taste of tears mixed with the faint coppery tang of humiliation on her tongue. She sank against the cool, unyielding wall, the smooth surface a stark contrast to the ragged edges of her emotions. The world outside the immediate bubble of her pain seemed distant, muffled. She heard the faint, rhythmic thud of her own heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The humiliation replayed in her mind, a cruel loop of mocking faces and cutting words. Each memory brought a fresh wave of agony, sharp and precise. How could they? How could anyone be so cruel? The vulnerability she had shown, the trust she had offered, had been twisted, ridiculed, and thrown back in her face with casual brutality. It felt like her very essence had been exposed and found wanting, leaving her hollow and exposed. For a long time, there was only the ebb and flow of grief, a tide of despair threatening to pull her under completely. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps. The future stretched before her, bleak and overwhelming. How could she ever face them again? How could she possibly overcome such public degradation? The weight of it pressed down, heavy as stone. But then, amidst the storm of anguish, a quiet calm began to settle, slow and tentative, like dust settling after a whirlwind. The tears didn't stop entirely, but their frantic urgency subsided. Her gaze, previously fixed inward on her pain, drifted towards the small, grimy window across the hall, catching the weak afternoon light. She saw her reflection there, faint and translucent, a figure hunched and broken. It was a harsh mirror, reflecting the depth of her defeat. Yet as she looked, something shifted. The image of utter helplessness stirred not just pity, but a flicker of something else entirely. A spark, fragile but undeniable. It was the quiet rebellion against remaining that shattered reflection forever. The raw hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface. But it was no longer the only thing she felt. A different sensation began to take root. A slow, steady hardening. This pain, this shame, would not define her. It would forge her. A quiet resolve settled in her gut, firm and unwavering. She would not hide away. She would not let this break her. She would learn from it, understand the mechanics of their cruelty, and find a way to endure. The path ahead felt daunting, filled with uncertainty and the lingering shadows of their scorn. But the thought of staying in this place of abject despair was suddenly far more terrifying than facing the future. She pushed herself away from the wall, her muscles stiff and sore, but a new-found steadiness in her limbs. The tears still tracked paths down her face, but her eyes held a new, quiet light, the dawning resolve of a spirit that refused to be extinguished. She would rise, not for vengeance, but for herself, to prove that she was more than the sum of her hurts. The hallway seemed colder now, echoing with phantom whispers and pointed silences. Every glance felt like a judgment, every cluster of students a conspiracy she was excluded from. The cafeteria's boisterous energy grated on her nerves. The trivial chatter about weekend parties and fleeting crushes felt alien, hollow. A heavy cloak of loneliness settled upon her shoulders, damp and suffocating. But amidst the social wasteland, a different world beckoned, quiet and steadfast. She found herself drifting instinctively towards the library, drawn by the hushed reverence within its walls. The air here smelled faintly of aged paper and dust motes dancing in shafts of sunlight slanting through tall windows. Running her fingers along the spines of forgotten volumes, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a balm to the constant ache of social isolation. Each book held a promise, a temporary escape, a new perspective, a challenge that only required her intellect, not her popularity. This was where she began to channel the raw, painful energy of her hurt and frustration. The sting of cruel words fueled a fierce determination to build a future where such pettiness held no power. Academics became not just a task, but a battlefield where she could win on her own terms. Calculus problems, once daunting, became intricate puzzles demanding her full concentration, pushing everything else from her mind. History wasn't just dates and names, but sagas of resilience, showing how people survived and even triumphed over seemingly insurmountable odds. While others congregated in noisy groups, their laughter often carrying a sharp, excluding edge, she would be hunched over textbooks, the smooth, cool surface of the library table beneath her elbows. The distant murmur of their frivolous concerns served only to sharpen her focus. Their world felt small and temporary. The world within these pages felt vast and eternal. She devoured complex concepts, the scent of printer ink on freshly copied notes filling her nostrils, the feel of dog-eared pages a comfort in her hands. Every correct answer, every mastered chapter felt like a small victory, a brick laid in the foundation of a future built far away from their reach. This wasn't just studying, it was fortification. It was a quiet, relentless pursuit of strength, a silent promise that their attempts to diminish her would only fuel her rise. She was forging her escape route, page by page, lesson by lesson. The weight pressed down, a familiar shroud wrapping around her shoulders as she walked the echoing halls. Each glance felt like a pinprick, each whispered word a stone added to the burden she carried. The air felt stale, thick with unspoken judgment and the lingering scent of disinfectant that did little to cleanse the atmosphere of its pervasive hostility. It seemed the negativity clung to the very plaster of the walls, a residue left by the relentless campaign against her. Her steps were quieter than usual, as if trying to shrink from the space she occupied, her gaze fixed somewhere just ahead, avoiding the eyes she knew were watching. She felt the cold bite of isolation deep in her bones, a chill that no sweater could ward off. Then a hand touched her arm, light and fleeting. She flinched, expecting the usual shove or sarcastic remark. But the touch was gentle, hesitant. Turning slowly, she saw not a smirking face, but a quiet peer, someone who usually blended into the background. There was a hesitant kindness in their eyes, a silent understanding that cut through the noise of her anxiety. The peer simply pressed a small, folded note into her hand. It felt warm from their touch. They offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a tiny gesture of solidarity, before quickly melting back into the flow of students, as if afraid of being seen. Her heart hammered a different rhythm now, a tentative beat of surprise, replacing the usual frantic tempo of fear. She clutched the note, the simple act of receiving something warm and intentionally kind, feeling foreign, yet profoundly comforting. The rough texture of the paper against her palm was real, tangible proof that not every interaction was laced with poison. The scent of old paper and faint ink rose as she unfolded it in a deserted corner. A simple doodle of a flower, accompanied by just 3 words: "You are seen." The words were simple, yet they landed with the force of a physical blow, not of pain, but of release. A sudden, unexpected warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the cold. She stood there, the bustling sounds of the hallway fading into a distant hum, focused only on the small piece of paper and the immense feeling it evoked. It was a tiny crack in the monolithic wall of cruelty, a sliver of light piercing the gloom. It didn't erase the pain, didn't stop the whispers, but it offered a lifeline, a quiet affirmation that she wasn't entirely alone. Resilience wasn't just enduring the storm. It was finding the strength to hold on to hope when a single, small act reminded you it still existed. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, not from fear anymore, but from the quiet force of a spirit beginning to remember its own strength. The air hung thick with the scent of too many floral bouquets and the low murmur of crowded whispers. She adjusted the ill-fitting cap, the coarse fabric scratching her skin, a small physical discomfort, easily overshadowed by the heavy weight of memories settling upon her shoulders. Below the wide brim, her eyes scanned the rows of faces, blurring into a single expectant mass, searching and simultaneously avoiding. Each face seemed to hold a flicker of the past, a reminder of the isolation, the pointed stares, the chilling indifference that had been her constant companions within these walls. It felt surreal, standing here on the precipice of release. This building, these halls, they were steeped in the echoes of pain. She remembered the sharp bite of cruel words, the ache of exclusion, the constant, low thrum of anxiety that had been her internal soundtrack for years. Every corner held a ghost of a moment she had wanted to forget. A time she felt small, broken, entirely alone. The polished floor beneath her worn shoes seemed to reflect not just the bright lights above, but the long, dark shadows she had navigated. She was the same person, yet fundamentally changed. The suffering had been real, a visceral wound that had refused to heal cleanly. But looking back now, from this cusp of freedom, she saw something else too. The jagged edges of the pain had, paradoxically, honed something sharp and resilient within her. The constant pressure had not crushed her. It had compressed her spirit into something unyielding. She hadn't just survived, she had endured, piece by piece, breath by painful breath. There was a quiet strength settled deep in her bones that hadn't existed before. It was a strength born of necessity, forged in the fires of hardship, an unexpected gift from the very environment that had sought to break her. The music swelled, a grand familiar tune that felt profoundly out of place against the backdrop of her private history. Names were called, one by one, each announcing the closing of this chapter for someone else. As her name approached, a tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of potent anticipation. This piece of paper, this ceremony, it wasn't just a recognition of academic completion. It was the final, formal severance from the toxic environment that had held her captive for so long. It was the key to the gate. Walking across the stage felt like traversing a bridge from a desolate island to a waiting shore. The feel of the rolled parchment in her hand was solid, tangible proof of her perseverance. It was a small victory, perhaps unnoticed by most, but monumental to her. As she walked back to her seat, she didn't look at the faces that might have wished her ill. Her gaze was fixed forward, towards the exit doors, towards the sunlit world outside. The air suddenly felt lighter, cleaner, filled with the promise of possibility. Leaving this place wasn't just an end. It was the beginning of a life where she could breathe freely, where the strength she had found could finally be used, not just for survival, but for building something entirely new, entirely her own. The moral was etched not on the diploma, but in her soul. Resilience was a quiet revolution, and surviving was the sweetest form of triumph over forces that wished you defeat. Graduation felt less like a finish line and more like a cliff face. The world stretched out, vast and indifferent, a daunting expanse where the rules of academic success seemed irrelevant. Doors that had felt open slammed shut. Application after application met silence or polite, sterile rejections that offered no comfort. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach, a familiar echo of past dismissals. The sharp, metallic tang of anxiety was a constant taste in her mouth. It felt, for a time, as though the shadows of her past might chase her forever, dimming the future she had fought so hard to reach. But beneath the apprehension lay a core of tempered steel. Resilience wasn't just a word. It was a muscle she had trained through years of pressure. She didn't have inherited wealth or influential connections. What she had was an unyielding will to prove herself and an intellect sharp enough to cut through noise. She took the jobs others dismissed, the ones that demanded long hours and offered little immediate reward. The nights blurred into days, marked only by the bitter taste of lukewarm coffee and the glowing screen of her laptop. Her fingers cramped from typing. Her back ached from hunching over desks, sometimes in lonely, echoing office buildings late at night. Slowly, painstakingly, things began to shift. Her sharp mind, often overlooked in glitzier settings, found its value in the quiet corners of analysis and strategy. She saw patterns others missed, devised solutions that were both innovative and practical. there were still setbacks, moments when frustration threatened to overwhelm her, when the unfairness of the world felt crushing. The sting of dismissive words from colleagues or superiors who underestimated her still landed like small, sharp stones. But she learned to absorb the impact, to channel the energy of indignation into focused effort. Each small victory was savored, a complex project successfully completed, a challenging client won over, a problem solved that had stumped everyone else. These weren't handed to her. They were earned through sheer grit and intelligence. The scent of success was subtle at first, like the faint smell of ozone before a storm, an electric promise in the air. Over the years, the quiet dedication translated into tangible results. A promotion here, a significant deal closed there. Her reputation began to precede her, not for drama or conflict, but for competence and unwavering reliability. The feeling of signing her name to an important document, the crisp rustle of paper, was a quiet triumph. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building, brick by painstaking brick, a future forged in resilience. A testament to the power of never giving up, no matter the odds. The words on the digital screen seemed to swim before her eyes, flickering with the indifferent glow of financial headlines. She had been scrolling through a national business journal, a world away from the small-town gossip she usually ignored, when a name leaked out, cold and stark against the clean typeface. Her breath caught in her throat. Northwood Academy. The very name brought a prickle to her skin, a phantom echo of hushed giggles and dismissive stares down long, polished corridors. The headline was short, brutally direct. Prestigious Northwood Academy facing financial crisis, possible sale. Prestigious. The word felt like a cruel joke. She remembered the peeling paint in the art room they wouldn't let her use properly, the threadbare uniforms they judged her for, the whispers that followed her every step. It hadn't felt prestigious then. It had felt like a cage built of scorn and exclusivity. A strange, disorienting sensation washed over her. It wasn't exactly triumph, not yet. It was more like standing before a colossal, unshakable monument that had suddenly developed cracks, its stone beginning to crumble. For so long, Northwood Academy had represented everything she wasn't, everything she had been told she could never be. It was the fortress of the entitled, the place where her spirit had been systematically diminished, and now it was on the brink of collapse. The article detailed declining enrollment, mismanagement of endowments, and escalating debt. It spoke of worried parents, frantic board members, and the very real possibility that the gates she had once longed to escape would close forever. A wave of conflicting emotions churned within her gut, disbelief warring with a bitter satisfaction, hurt mingling with a nascent sense of power. The school that had cast her out, that had made her feel small and insignificant, was now vulnerable. It was fragile. She read on, absorbing the sterile language of finance, assets, liabilities, potential buyers circling like vultures. They were looking for someone to rescue it, or perhaps to repurpose it entirely. The weight of her tablet felt heavy in her hand, the cool metal grounding her as her thoughts began to race. Rescue it? Why would anyone want to rescue a place built on such cruelty? Repurpose it? What would that even mean? And then, an idea, preposterous and electrifying, began to bloom in the fertile ground of her shock and lingering pain. It was audacious, almost unthinkable, given her history with the place. It was a seed, tiny but potent, planted in the ruins of their pride. What if the buyer wasn't just anyone? What if the person who decided the fate of Northwood Academy was someone who knew its true cost, someone who had paid a different kind of price within its walls. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, cold and exhilarating all at once. The school had mocked her, broken her, and now perhaps it had just presented her with an opportunity for a different kind of resurgence entirely. The weight of the idea settled in her chest, a strange blend of bitter past and intoxicating future. It wasn't just about getting back at them, not entirely. Though the memory of their dismissive laughter still pricked like shards of glass beneath her skin, and the sting of being cast aside like yesterday's trash lingered on her tongue like old pennies. That desire for vindication burned hot, a necessary fuel, yes, but beneath it lay something deeper. She ran a finger along the spine of a thick, leather-bound notebook, its pages crisp and waiting. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice written on a grand scale. To take the very entity that had tried to erase her and reshape it in her own image, to cleanse the rot she knew still festered within its corporate walls. That held a profound, almost spiritual appeal. It was a chance to prove, not just to them, but to herself, that she was more than they had ever allowed her to be. More capable, more resilient, more deserving. It was a chance for change, for her to impose her values on a place that had embodied everything she detested. The city hummed softly outside her window, a distant thrum against the quiet tension in the room. The air felt charged, expectant. Taking a deep breath, she inhaled the faint, clean scent of fresh paper and the comforting aroma of the cooling tea beside her. This was it, the point of no return. The flicker of an idea had become a resolve of steel. Her hand trembled slightly as she uncapped her pen. The first step, she knew, was research. She needed data, hard facts about the company's current financials, its market position, its vulnerabilities. She would need to understand its structure intimately, to find the leverage points. Hours blurred into a focused haze as she opened encrypted files, cross-referenced databases, and scribbled notes in the waiting notebook. Legal avenues, financial strategies, potential allies. The pieces began to fall into place on the page. Messy at first, then slowly forming a recognizable, albeit daunting, shape. The taste of determination was sharp and clean, cutting through the lingering bitterness of the past. The plan was embryonic, fragile, but it was real, and it started now. The sprawling grounds and imposing architecture of the old school felt impossibly distant, a fortress guarded by layers of bureaucracy and financial gates. The protagonist, her identity cloaked in layers of legal anonymity, embarked on the daunting quest to acquire it. It was a quiet war fought in hushed phone calls and sterile conference rooms, a stark contrast to the emotional battles she had previously endured. The air in these high-stakes environments carried the faint, sterile scent of photocopier toner and old paper, a scent of calculated transactions and veiled intentions. The challenge was immense. The school, though tainted by recent events, was a valuable property. Wealthy, established interests circled like vultures, their bids clean, confident, and backed by conventional power. She felt the familiar sting of being the underdog, her resources modest compared to the titans of industry, who saw only profit margins and prestige. Every step was fraught with risk, every negotiation a tightrope walk. The need for secrecy was paramount. If those who had wronged her or their powerful allies discovered she was the buyer, they would undoubtedly use every dirty trick imaginable to sabotage the deal. She imagined their smug faces if they knew, feeling a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Strategic moves were calculated with painstaking precision. She couldn't outspend them, so she had to outthink them. Leveraging obscure legal clauses, identifying overlooked structural issues that lowered the property value slightly but were manageable for her long-term vision, and finding quiet, ethical investors who believed in her purpose rather than just the bottom line. These were her weapons. There were days the weight of it felt crushing, the thick binders of contracts heavy in her hands, the legalese swimming before her eyes. The sound of a ringing phone brought a jolt of adrenaline, never knowing if it was progress or another roadblock. But tension escalated with each counteroffer, each closed-door meeting. She learned to read the subtle shifts in tone in a lawyer's voice, to sense the hidden agenda behind a competitor's polite inquiry. The feeling of being constantly observed, even when unseen, was a constant companion. But with each small victory, a clause accepted, a financing hurdle cleared, a competing bidder quietly withdrawing, after encountering unexpected complexities she had strategically amplified, a flicker of grim satisfaction grew. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was an act of reclaiming what was lost, a strategic flank maneuver in her fight for justice. The turnaround began not with a bang, but with the quiet clicking of a pen, signing a crucial preliminary agreement, a victory won in the shadows, paving the way for a potential resurgence. The air in the assembly hall felt heavy, thick with a nervous anticipation that had settled over the gathered staff and administration. They stood awkwardly, eyes darting towards the entrance, awaiting the arrival of the school's mysterious new owner. Whispers barely broke the silence, speculating on who this unseen figure might be, this person who now held the keys to their future. A faint scent of lemon polish and old paper lingered, a nostalgic perfume of countless school days, now tainted with apprehension. She appeared. She didn't stride in with fanfare, but walked with a quiet, deliberate grace that commanded attention. Her eyes, once wide and vulnerable in these very halls, now held a steely calm, reflecting the polished floorboards beneath her feet. Recognition flickered across faces, first faint, then widening into startled disbelief. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone they knew. Someone many had dismissed, even scorned, years ago. The head administrator, a man whose jowls had seemed perpetually set in disapproval back then, stepped forward, his usual bluster replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnervingly in the hushed space. He gestured vaguely towards her. She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The silence returned, more profound than before. She stood before them, the very picture of poised power. Yet her gaze seemed to see through the years, past the polite smiles, straight into the heart of old injustices. The weight of her presence pressed down, stirring buried memories in many minds. A cold dread began to creep into the room, chilling the skin of those who had forgotten. Or perhaps her voice, when she finally spoke, was clear and steady, devoid of the tremble it once held. It resonated with an undeniable authority.
Thank you. I believe an introduction is in order, though some of you may find it familiar.
She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the pale faces before her. A shiver went down spines.
My name is Eleanor Vance. Many of you knew me as Alara Vance, a student who walked these corridors not so long ago.
Gasps rippled through the crowd. Disbelief warred with dawning horror on the faces of the administration. The head administrator's eyes bulged. A female administrator clapped a hand over her mouth. A silent scream trapped within.
Vance, but that's impossible.
The head administrator stammered, his voice hoarse with shock.
You left.
Another managed to whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Eleanor offered no smile, no outward display of triumph, only the quiet assurance of undeniable fact.
I did, and now I have returned.
She gestured around the hall, the simple movement encompassing the entire institution.
I am the new owner of this school.
The statement hung in the air, a pronouncement of a changed world. The color drained from the faces of those who had held power here, replaced by a sickening shade of fear. The turnaround was complete. The return as owner, now a startling reality, witnessed by those who least expected it. She moved through the glittering hall, the murmur of conversation a distant hum. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the subtle fragrance of exotic flowers arranged with lavish care. Then, across the expanse of polished floor, she saw them. Faces etched with the passage of time, yes, but instantly recognizable. Their features frozen in a moment of profound shock as their eyes met hers. Disbelief warred with palpable discomfort in their expressions. A man stumbled back slightly, his hand knocking against a nearby table, causing glasses to rattle precariously. A woman beside him paled dramatically, clutching her companion's arm as if for support, her knuckles white against dark fabric. They had known her when she was small, quiet, easily overlooked, a target. Seeing her now, poised and radiant, her presence commanding attention even from a distance, felt like a physical blow to their collective memory. She wore an air of quiet confidence that was utterly foreign to the girl they had tormented. The expensive material of her dress felt cool and smooth against her skin, grounding her in the present reality. She didn't flinch or avert her gaze. Her eyes were steady, cool, acknowledging their presence without lingering, without fear. There was no fire of anger in her posture, no hint of past hurt, only a quiet strength that felt infinitely more potent than any outburst could ever be. The air between them seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of unspoken history, a stark contrast to the light, airy feel of the rest of the room. One of the women, whose sarcastic laughter had once echoed in empty hallways, visibly swallowed hard. She took a hesitant step forward, a strained, artificial smile attempting to form on her lips.
Oh my gosh! Is that really you? It's been, wow! I didn't even recognize you at first.
Her voice was thin, laced with an awkward falseness that grated against the sophisticated backdrop. A man beside her, who had led the pack in whispered mockery and petty sabotage, shifted his weight uncomfortably, looking away, then back again, seemingly unable to reconcile the powerful woman before him with the girl he remembered cornering by the lockers, the metallic tang of her fear thick in the air back then.
Yeah, wow. Never thought I'd see you here.
His tone was flat, stripped bare of its former arrogance and bravado. She held their gaze for another quiet moment, allowing the sound of their hesitant, fumbled words to hang in the air. She simply stated that yes, it was indeed her, and that life had a funny way of leading people down unexpected paths. There was no accusation in her tone, no hint of gloating, just a simple, unvarnished fact, delivered with serene confidence. The awkwardness clung to them like a suffocating cloak, a silent testament to the past they couldn't outrun, faced now with the unshakable presence of the person they had wronged. Anya walked the polished halls, the vast space now belonging to her. The keys felt cool and heavy in her palm, a stark contrast to the icy fear that had once gripped her in these very corridors. She could still almost hear the echoes of dismissive laughter, the sharp words that had cut deep. That past pain, a constant, dull ache for so long, now served as the bedrock of her purpose. This institution, once a monument to superficiality and cruel hierarchies, would be reborn. Her vision was simple yet radical for this place. Cultivate kindness above connections, foster integrity over inheritance, and celebrate character more than curriculum scores. Her initial actions were swift and symbolic. The gilded, ostentatious portraits of past benefactors, known for their ruthlessness, were quietly removed. In their place, she commissioned vibrant murals depicting scenes of collaboration, empathy, and diverse children learning and playing together. The air, once thick with the scent of old money and unspoken judgment, now carried a lighter fragrance of possibility, perhaps the lingering aroma of fresh paint and hope. She remembered the knot in her stomach, the watery taste of fear whenever she had to face certain teachers or students. That feeling was her guide. No child here would ever feel that way again if she could help it. Empathy wasn't a soft skill. It was the fundamental requirement for being human, the true measure of a person's worth. Those who had thrived on the suffering of others, who had believed their status exempted them from consequence, had already begun to see the world shift beneath their feet. Some left, unable to adapt to a climate where kindness was valued. Others remained, forced to confront the hollowness of their past actions as they witnessed the quiet revolution taking place. The true value, she knew with every fiber of her being, lay not in the brand of one's shoes or the size of one's inherited fortune, but in the generosity of one's spirit and the courage to stand for what was right. The setting sun cast long shadows down the now welcoming hallways, painting the new murals in hues of gold and rose. A profound stillness settled over the empty school building at the close of day, a quiet peace that spoke louder than any shouted insult ever had. Anya stood by a large window, watching the light fade from the sky. She had transformed a place of cruelty into a beacon of hope, a testament to the idea that even the most broken things could be rebuilt stronger, better. The journey had been arduous, marked by moments of despair and doubt, but standing here now, feeling the solid floor beneath her feet and the gentle breeze through a slightly open window, she knew it had been worth it. Her legacy wouldn't be built on wealth or status, but on the countless small acts of kindness that would ripple out from these halls for generations to come. The echoes of the past were fading, replaced by the soft whisper of a more just and compassionate future. A future where every single soul understood that empathy had consequences, and that true value resided within the heart.